are at the top of the hour. I am going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Once again, if you'd like to share your name, what institution you're representing here today, and your position in the chat, we'd love to get to know who you are. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us on this Friday afternoon. And my name is Dr. Mesa Safi. I am currently serving as the Associate Dean of Academic Innovation and Faculty Support at Southwest Tennessee Community College out in Memphis, Tennessee. My motto is, I am a teacher first. So in my current role, I lead the Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence at Southwest Tennessee Community College, collaborating closely with faculty and academic departments. Today, I wanted to present to you my approach to the formation of the ISLO Executive Leadership Committee, which stemmed from my inspiration of and in collaboration with SLO champions in the coaches community. In my role as a committee chair, I've led the step-by-step process of defining institutional student learning outcomes with a faculty committee representing various disciplines across our college. Frankly, this is an initial development of the proposed ISLOs, whereby our committee provided clear definitions and criteria tailored to our community college context. So using the wealth of knowledge that I personally gained through the SLO symposiums and through the mentorship work that I did with Trisha Wilking out of Long Beach City College, I'm also leading the SLO facilitators cohort, a program designed to empower facilitators around promoting or enhancing a culture of assessment around student learning outcomes. So these facilitators serve as crucial liaisons across the college. So not only do we have facilitators as members of our ISLO Leadership Committee who contributed to this initial development, but we also have them carrying forward the work as SLO facilitators as a professional development cohort. And that group is a much larger group. So in my presentation today, you're going to see first the list of our deemed representatives who make up our cross-disciplinary committee. And they've diligently worked towards identifying competencies that are crucial to the Southwest community college student experience. And our ISLOs are overarching statements that describe the knowledge, the skills, the abilities, the attitudes that students are expected to acquire during their time at our college. So these ISLOs, if they're eventually approved in the future, will represent the collective educational goals of our institution, and they'll serve as a guide for curriculum development, for teaching practices, for assessment, student assessment. And so our committee has undergone a very comprehensive process of analysis and collaboration to develop the ISLOs that I'm going to share with you today. Keep in mind, this is a work in progress, and we plan on continuing our work to enhance our students' educational journey and to align with our current existing outcomes, whether they're at the course or at the program level. So on a very high level, I'm going to share with you some of the research and the frameworks which grounded our work, and also share with you the iterative process of how we arrived at our 5 competencies that we as a committee feel or propose as especially important to the success of our students. So to begin, I just want to start off by showing you, we began our work with a cross-analysis of existing research and frameworks. And this provided our committee with some research-based domains of competence to choose from, but we didn't limit ourselves to those specific domains of competence. that were deemed important. We also expanded to any competencies that were deemed important to the success of our students after they left our institution and within our context. So we extended the work by examining our institution's mission, vision, values, and we analyzed how or where or if any of those mission and visions, if any of the mission, vision, or any of our values aligned with any of the competencies that were in NACE, CAS, and AACU. It's also important to note here that all of our general education courses use an adaptation of AACU's competencies, which we call the 7 core competencies that are adapted across all general education courses across the state. So with that said, that cross-analysis and examination of NACE, CAS, and AACU against our mission and values led us to creating this relational model. This relational model was uniquely designed as a Southwest framework for ISLO development. So this was the framework that we grounded our work in for ISLO development based on the existing research conducted by NACE and CAS and AACU. We analyzed the components of the values rubrics, and thereby we had an exemplary model, and then we could reverse engineer the entire project. Excuse me. Okay. So let me see here. All right. So then we extended our work, okay, and we began a cross-analysis and examination. Let me see. Each committee member, so this table here shows that each committee member was tasked with prioritizing 8 domains of competence and ranking them in order of importance and relevance to our students. I have to tell you that the final 5 that we agreed upon were identified with a lot of precision and a lot of consideration, incorporating multiple feedback sessions from our committee discussions and taking into consideration the uniqueness of each of our 3 divisions at the college. So our allied health sciences, our business and technologies, our humanities divisions. What were they going to give here? How do they apply? All right, over the next few slides, I'm going to show you some various iterations of our domains of competence, okay? We were consistently evaluating and revising these through our conversations as we explored ranking, we explored categorizations of subcategories for each domain. And you can see we change based on our conversations, we changed what we identified as the top 5 or the top 6 domains of competence. And I will just give you a moment to read that. I know I've given you a lot of information already. I'll give you a moment to take a look. And as you can see, like for example, in this slide, collaboration here, originally one of our domains of competence that we deemed really important. In the next iteration of it, it gets collapsed into the others because after our discussions, we thought, oh, you know what? Collaboration could be applied in communication. It could be applied in critical thinking. It could be applied in career and self-development. So for that reason, there were changes being made consistently. And then between, for example, this one and this one, the citizenship and community and cultural and global awareness were also not collapsed, but they were combined, they were condensed into one domain of competence. So if we go back to our original relational model, we were trying to identify what are those big buckets of competence? what are those big domains of competencies that we will identify as crucial and important to the graduates and the success of our students after they leave our institution. Take a moment to take all that in. All right. We're also going to hear from one of our faculty members who is on the committee in just a moment, but I also wanted to extend as well. After we identified those domains of competence, you can see, and I know this is probably very small. Let me try to make it bigger by zooming in just a little. All right, you can see that for each of our 6 domains, those big buckets, we also went through and we discussed some of the dimensions of each of those domains of competence. So extensive discussions on possible outcomes, domains of or dimensions, subcategories of each of those competencies was also undertaken here. So I want to pause here for a moment. I want to ask our committee member, I believe Mark Kaplowitz is on the call here today, and he is going to introduce himself. And then I want him to give us kind of a reflection of his experience in this first process. So Mark.
Hi there. I hope you can all hear me. Yeah, so it was an interesting process to be involved in. I mean, as a faculty member doing service teaching in particular, I mean, there aren't, I teach philosophy. There are not many students who come to Southwest seeking out philosophy. It's, you know, a gen ed requirement for a wide variety of programs. Some programs in specifically request that their students take philosophy, but no one is there specifically for philosophy. And therefore, I'm used to focusing on my own coursework, on what are the objectives, how do I achieve the objectives for my courses, and how do I achieve the gen ed, the specific gen ed requirements. But looking at things from that broader college-wide perspective was interesting, and seeing how much is shared, how much we have in common with our colleagues in other programs was rather helpful. But beyond that, one of the initiatives, one of the interests of the college itself, is to break down more of the walls between the transfer programs and the non-transfer programs, between the college credit programs and non-college credit programs, even on the back end, using similar computer systems across both. And so part of the work here also involved kind of building those connections at an institutional level, and helping colleagues on both sides kind of see the commonalities, the common interest in forging these common learning objectives across the institution. So that there was a lot that I learned from participating in this.
All right, awesome. Thank you. I'm also going to pause here for a moment. Does anybody have any questions about, I know I went over really quickly, but does anybody have any questions? We can open the floor for questions. All right. Okay, I guess I'll move on then. Okay, so here's some examples of some of the, well, parts of the Excel documents and Word documents that we collaborated on. Here, I'll show you as well. Like, for example, this one here on this Excel document, we spent some time looking at the different domains of competence, as I mentioned earlier, and then what that definition would look like. But also, what are those specific criteria or outcomes to show that students have really have applied that outcome multiple times, multiple opportunities to apply those outcomes across their student journey. So this one here kind of gave us like a question mark. We weren't sure for citizenship and community. We weren't sure what would that look like? How could we make those outcomes easily defined or measurable? And so we kept on, carrying on in those discussions. Let me also go over what we did for Summer Institute, which is our 3-day professional or faculty development program that runs in May of every year. And so what we did is we took our work, which we had our competencies, we took that one step further, and we began to map our ISLOs to a few courses and programs during our working session. So these sample maps that I'm sharing with you are reflective of where, like, we were comparing our course SLOs to our ISLOs and mapping out where do they fit, do they align, or do they not? And then we noticed that although, for example, the importance of C5, which at that time was community, local, and global responsibility, in our conversations, we noticed that it was not always reflected explicitly or defined in the course student learning outcomes or even in the program student learning outcomes. So this took us back to our work, and it made us think about it again. It meant that we needed to revise. It may mean that maybe the course SLOs or the program SLOs need to be revised. This is a conversation to have with more faculty members at the college. Let me see here. An example of the paralegal studies program. So as I just mentioned here, like C5, which was C being competence 5, which was local and global responsibility, was not explicitly stated, but could be implied. However, you could see all of the other competencies, C1, C2, C3, C4, they were all in alignment with the program learning outcomes for that particular program.
Mesa, there are 2 questions that have come up in the chat.
Sure.
One of them is, are you able to make the outcome bigger, or can you share the presentation? That was from Ming Chang.
Yeah.
And so the second question was from Joanna Spice, who joined a few minutes late and was asking how many people actively worked on developing the domains, definitions, and dimensions. And on that first slide, we had the list of faculty. I wasn't counting. I don't recall. It was somewhere between 8 and 10, I think.
We had, I believe, 12, but 10. Yeah. So in terms of number, we had 10. When we first got together, let me just take a step back for a minute. When we first began discussing, it was only a couple, maybe 3 people that were discussing this. But then as we began to think about in a more meaningful and an intentional way, who can we invite to give us representation? We wanted to ensure that we had representation from multiple faculty members across the college, across the various divisions and programs that were offered. So for that second question. For the first question, could we share the slide deck? Of course, yes. We most definitely can. And I could show you the Excel documents and the Word documents, but I think they're very small as well. So let me share instead. Let me share instead the outcomes. Okay. So these are, let me go over here. So these are the outcomes. The following represent the competencies. So the top here, these would be the competencies, and this would be the definition of that competence. And I think that one of my, I'm going to move that over just so you can see for a minute. But the competence, and then the definition of that competence, and that's further broken down into various criteria for each competence. So within, and I will share the proposal in just a minute on the screen here after we go through the presentation. But I wanted to say that they encompass both academic and non-academic areas, kind of to cultivate well-rounded individuals who are prepared for success in their careers, in the workforce, in their personal lives. We believe that these competencies are vital to the holistic development and the success of our students, and they serve as a reference point for faculty, staff, students to guide their teaching and learning, their assessment activities. Additionally, the definitions that are provided here, they enable college faculty and staff to communicate the value of the ISLOs to external stakeholders like employees or transfer institutions, because we are a community college, or accrediting bodies. And the suggested outcomes, which is here, let me share this screen here with you. All right, give me a second. Okay, there we go. So to that end, I wanted to share the proposal here. Okay, so for example, the following 5 competencies and outcomes and criteria are proposed. This is our proposal to academic affairs, but also this is something that we want to take to students as well and get their feedback on. And I'll talk about future steps as well in just a minute. But as you can see, so these are the domains of competence at the top here. And we've got 5. So as I go through, you can see this one was particularly important to us. Mark, do you want to speak on this?
Well, that one is particularly important because of the because in general, as an institutional objective, that workforce development is a major priority in the current plan and in the current quality improvement plan for the institution. And competence in a specialty, it means one thing in academics in terms of preparing our transfer students, but it also means something rather meaningful as well in the workforce development side of the house. And so that was a language that allowed both sides to really talk to each other in a very direct way. And but it's very much part of how the college wants to represent itself in the community in terms of workforce development.
Thank you so much. So as we look at our 5 competencies, we can see that, for example, communication, this is the competence, the domain of competence, followed by the definition for that competence, which was comprised by using some of the criteria and the dimensions of each of those domains of competence. So the dimensions so after thinking about the domain of competence, we thought about what are the various dimensions of that competence? How do we categorize that? And then what does that look like in terms of outcomes? So for example, if you can see on our screen here, to effectively communicate ideas in a spoken and or written form to target audience, okay, is one of the criteria, or students can demonstrate this competence by actively and effectively engaging with instructors and or peers. Employing interpersonal skills by actively and effectively engaging with instructors or peers. For example, considering situational, cultural, or personal contexts within or across multiple modes of communication would apply to this part of the definition. And so the definition is a condensed statement based on the outcomes that are provided for each domain of competence. And each domain of competence was identified through various dimensions of that domain. I'll let you think about that. Do we have any
So yeah,
questions?
there are a few comments that have come up in the chat since the last check-in on the chat. One was Joanna Spice continued thanking us that and explaining that at her institution, they're going through the process now and have about 15 people on their committee, but also have to reach out to various committees and teams for feedback, or choose to reach out to various committees and teams. And I responded to that TBR, Tennessee Board of Regents, is actively in the midst of a multi-year review of the gen ed requirements for the state. And so one of the participants in our work is our local gen ed committee chair. And that was one of the ways we were being kept abreast of what's going on the state level. And then also Ming Chan commented to thank you so much for sharing, Dr. Safi. This is awesome. Our college is working on ISLO recently. I love how yours is broken down in detail.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I mean, this will look different for each individual institution. As Mark mentioned earlier, for example, competence in a specialty was really important because we offer such a varied array of programs. And so when students come to us, whether they are transferring to another institution, a four-year institution, or whether they are getting a certificate and enrolled in a certificate program, or whether they are here for an associate's degree, that translates into having competence in that specialization. And so this was really crucial to us, as well as that workforce development aspect of it. So being able to demonstrate the skills and dispositions required to develop a growth mindset, to pursue and fulfill personal and career goals, and to successfully enter and advance in the workforce to actively serve our Mid-South community. As a community college, we pride ourselves in being the bridge for students to go from high school into the workforce. And they do that by coming to Southwest for a degree or a certificate or a program of some kind. And so that was important for us as well, to that career readiness aspect, in addition to competence in a specialty. And I feel like those two were really unique. They were really unique to our institution, our ISLOs, so our SLOs as an institution. Another thing that I think we need to think about for the future is, what will this look like to students? So I'm going to go back to...
Before you do that, if I can just interject a little bit, and I think that fifth one about community service and career readiness also is important in another aspect. I mean, the president of our institution often reminds us that community is our middle name, right? That if we're Southwest Tennessee Community College, community is our middle name. And it's really important that we emphasize that students are not just there for their personal development, for personal vocational development, but that we serve a broader community, and that we want to integrate our students into that vision of serving a broader community as well. At times, earlier drafts, you saw that referred to as citizenship, but really it's the spirit of the community college is an important part to carry through in these institutional learning objectives, student learning objectives. And that, and also, I mean, we're operating in Tennessee. Many of you, it appears, are Californians, and we operate in different political environments, but we do need to have an eye on how our work fits within the broader, the broader landscape of what's going on in our region and in our state.
Thank you. Yes, two really crucial points to the development of our ISLOs. I am going to stop sharing here, but I do want to go back to our presentation. Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, like our next step is to think about what does this look like for students? I think that, well, what does it look like for, how are we going to get students' feedback on it? What is it going to look like? Is it going to look like this visual, like just really envisioning how it's going to look to the student side. In addition, we talked a little bit about badging. We talked about more extensive alignment activities through CTLE. We talked about adopting ISLO as one for one or a couple programs. We talked about having some common rubrics, which we drafted, but we have not looked at or vetted, let me say. So from the ISLO committee, this academic year, beginning in end of August, beginning of September, we also created an SLO facilitators cohort. And that is kind of like a professional development cohort. These were some of the aims as an SLO facilitator. Participants, of course, most, if not all, of our ISLO committee members are also SLO facilitators and part of this cohort. And so as an SLO facilitator, we engage in working sessions on SLO mapping and alignment activities. We engaged in mapping courses. We engaged in mapping courses to proposed ISLOs, and I'm going to share that in just a few minutes. We also looked and examined some resources to aid us in our SLO assessment processes through our SharePoint page. So there is a SharePoint page where all of these resources are collected, and they're there for the SLO facilitators per usual. We want to create a course to program SLO mapping visual, and then we want to plan meaningful analysis and actions activities to improve our teaching and learning. So with that said, I want to share with you the course level SLO to ISLO mapping document. Rick, do you have it up, or should I?
I don't have it open.
Okay,
right now.
I got it. Yeah. Okay. So give me 1 second. Sorry, I keep going in and out. I'm not used to Zoom, so please bear with me. All right. I think that's a crucial part to our work as well, the work that we've done as SLO facilitators, and in expanding that work further. So I actually will share with you both Mark's course map for Philosophy 1030, and then I'll also share with you the course to ISLO mapping. And we could take a look at that. No questions yet? No questions so far?
Nothing new in the chat, but I think that I think what you're going to bring up is the document that you're going to raise is actually one that's important for the process, in the sense that I suspect on some level the challenge of any project of this sort is creating buy-in among the faculty, right? Faculty are focused on teaching the course they have to teach, and or the courses rather that are within their teaching domain. And when ISLOs look like something that's just layered upon what already, that's another responsibility, another, you know, not the correct metaphor, but almost an unfunded mandate of sorts, right? That it's just, something else to do on top of what's already done. It becomes, yeah, that would be an obstacle to achieving buy-in. But when the mapping has been done to a number of courses, when and also onto programs, sort of in the process of developing, in the process of rolling out the ideas, it becomes, I believe it'll substantially simplify getting buy-in from the faculty down the road, because we can show that what's being done is that we're formalizing the description of what's already going on within the courses that are being offered, within the courses that are being taught. It's we're not forcing faculty to do something different. What we're doing is visualizing what's already going on in and as Mesa was suggesting, in a form that will be more easily seen by students once the student rollout part is prepared and ready. I think that the student rollout obviously comes after, after achieving faculty and administrative buy-in to this project, but it's but that's what's going on in this mapping, that when we break down each of the component, well, what you have here are how the course SLOs show up within each of the modules within the course, the assessments how the assessments match onto the course's SLOs. But then as you move to the right, I believe on this table, you'll find that then the ISLOs start mapping onto, or maybe they were coded.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. In that third column, they were coded by number, the ISLOs, and the pieces really are integrated to one another. It's not burdensome on faculty. It's a different description of what faculty do, and that's and that I think is helpful to achieving a wider buy-in.
Right. And so this was work that was conducted through the SLO facilitators cohort, mapping a course that you've taught multiple times, you're very familiar with, but really explicitly looking at, for each module, what course SLOs, what are being applied, what level of learning is happening here, what are the assessments that I'm using to measure those SLOs, what learning experiences am I providing for my students, what resources am I providing to ensure that they're successful. And so as an instructor, really thinking about that intentionally and mapping it out in a way that allows you to see what you're doing and why you're doing it is crucial. And then taking that information after you've looked at all of that and turning it into, okay, let me look at how these course SLOs, which I've already mapped, can now map onto or align with our institutional student learning outcomes. And I always say, if we have solid course student learning outcomes that have been mapped through courses, they're assessed appropriately, they're measured, then we've got a bedrock foundation of course SLOs that can align to our ISLOs. And so on this document here that I'm sharing, and I'll zoom in just a little bit more. And again, this is Mark's, and I appreciate, Mark, thank you so much again for allowing us to share your work here today. But we took, for example, different various courses that Mark teaches, philosophy 1030, philosophy 1040. And he was able to meaningfully think about and align which SLO at the course level aligns with the ISLO that we have proposed. And so, for example, for communication and intellectual confidence, in these two courses, and according to Mark's experience and knowledge, and him being an expert in this content, in this discipline, these course level SLOs map onto this ISLO. And then the same thing again for curiosity and critical thinking, and the same thing again for citizenship and cultural diversity. And the same thing for competence and a specialty, that one that we all are very, very particular about. And for community service and career readiness. And so for each of these courses, he was able to map one. Now there could be more than one, there could be multiple, but at least one for each of these. There were course maps, or I want to say course to ISLO maps, that were blank here for some. They couldn't find, there wasn't an SLO that aligned with this particular ISLO. And so that was a question of, okay, does that mean that our course SLOs need to be reviewed? Is this competence crucial and important enough for us to say we need to incorporate it into our courses? And what does that mean for course development? What does that mean for going through the curriculum process? Or is it that this ISLO is irrelevant to that particular course? And then we went further and identified one assignment that emphasizes the application of one or more of these competencies. And I don't mean to put you on the spot, Mark, but do you want to talk a little bit on this whole document and maybe this assignment?
Well, actually, one of the interesting things, I'm just thinking about this as I'm looking at it again, if you roll back to the last of the competencies over there, the community service and career readiness, what you'll also notice is between my two courses, between the Intro to Philosophy and the Intro to Ethics course, most of those first four really, my ISLOs are fairly similar between the two courses. The ISLOs that mapped onto each of the domains were fairly similar until we got to that fifth one. And that in one case, for the Intro to Philosophy class, that 1030, the course SLO was explaining the nature and assessing the value of philosophy as a practice. That's that perhaps is, well, that relates to the aspect of the description of the ISLO that refers to it as developing a growth mindset and fulfilling personal and career goals, that the purpose of studying philosophy is that it has value as a practice in the life of the person who studies it. Whereas for the Intro to Ethics class, that the purpose of studying ethics is to be able to apply basic ethical concepts to solving practical problems. And those are really hitting very different sides of this notion of community service, or the notion of career readiness, or the notion of personal development. The ISLOs are themselves rather open and flexible to interpretation, but that it adds up to something as students are introduced to them, or as they're reinforced across different parts of the curriculum, different aspects of specific programs. So when specific courses don't hit one of these ISLOs, but the program itself sees where those ISLOs fit within a program of study, it accomplishes the institutional goal. So it's important sometimes to zoom out. It's important sometimes to zoom in when evaluating something that's an institutional student learning objective, because students don't just have a single 3-credit encounter as their encounter with the institution. But the flexibility of those ISLOs also makes it easier to see different perspectives, different domains on that. In terms of the specific assignments, I mean, in a philosophy class, writing philosophy essays is the heart and soul of where the work of philosophy goes on. That is the developing competence in that specialty. But it's also where critical thinking goes on. It's where communication goes on. And a philosophy essay that doesn't point towards community service and career readiness, towards developing the personal attributes that make it possible to serve a community in career readiness. I mean, from my perspective, as a philosophy instructor, it becomes something abstract, but not something that students will relate to. So it happens that I'm in a discipline where hitting these competencies is really essential to what we do. I wouldn't suggest that writing essays is the core of every single discipline that's out there, and it will have to look different in different types of courses. But I will say my writing prompts in my courses are specifically designed to hit all of my learning objectives anyway, to hit multiple goals all at once. My rubrics break down by my learning objectives for my courses as well. I mean, I'm looking to see all of these things happening at once and to be integrated as a whole.
Thank you for sharing that. Actually, I just want to mention again how your comment on how these ISLOs could be interpreted in varied ways based on the course, the content, the discipline that you are teaching. And so I think that's a very good point, to realizing that these ISLOs need to be general enough to be applicable across various activities that the students will engage in as they go through their on their college journey here at Southwest. So
one of the other things that came up in our meetings and discussions as well is that if they're institutional learning objectives, they don't just occur in the formal curriculum. They also should translate into co-curricular activities, into extracurricular activities, that ideally everything that occurs within the college framework is advancing these learning objectives, whether a student's participating in intercollegiate athletics, whether a student is participating in student governance, in honor societies, in any number of other activities. And it gives meaning and purpose to the things students do, to the extent that, I mean, I imagine we're not alone in having had a challenge of getting students re-involved in co-curricular activities in a post-COVID environment. But when we're able to explain how and why all of it's part of a package, that it all serves the same objective, the same set of objectives, that it becomes easier to build our own internal community.
right. And then just to add on to that, we also, like just the other day, discussed, what does it mean to master these competencies? Really, can anyone master critical thinking, or can you master communication? So instead, thinking about it in terms of the number of opportunities that students have to apply this competence, whether it's through a course or any other activity, student affairs related, extracurricular, etc. They get the chances or the opportunities to apply this competence over and over and over, to reinforce that competence. And I'm going to go back to our relational model. No, not our relational model, sorry. I'm going to go back to how are we going to continue this work? So looking towards future activities, our committee has considered recommendations for the implementation of ISLOs across the different areas of the college. And we understand like the importance of continuous improvement, of staying responsive to our changing educational landscape. So our next tasks would include to do additional mapping activities, or like I said earlier, to pilot the ISLOs through one or more programs. We also began drafting some common rubrics for each of these ISLOs, which I can share. Let me do that. I think we've got 7 minutes. I could do that very quickly at the end. But we could also, we want to get student input. So we want to reach out to, our student council and get students who are going to give us input. What do they think of these 5? What does it mean to them? How are they interpreting the definitions? How are they interpreting the criteria that we've set? And so all of this is still underway, has not been completed. We want to carry on this work, but it was a matter of how do we get started when we began this discussion a year and a half ago in one of the teaching and learning sub-council meetings. How do we get started? We know ISLOs. We've heard of other institutions that have implemented them. We've heard of these badging, the badging of students for each competence, and that they can take that to the workforce, they can put it in their portfolios. But what does it look like for us at Southwest? How do we begin? And so that was kind of a very high level presentation of how we began the work. What did we talk about? What did we analyze? What did we ground our work in? What research did we ground our work in? And then also taking all of that and relating it to our institution, our mission, our values. And so with that said, I'm just going to share one more document, and that is the rubrics. Please know that this is, has not been vetted, has not been examined, but it is how we plan to apply, how these common rubrics can be used in these various courses. And you don't have to use the entire rubric, you can use a portion of it, one criteria of the rubric. And let me stop sharing here for a second. If we have any questions, Mark, let me know. I'd really like to make sure that we're getting all of the questions answered. So again, we keep seeing the same language, the same definitions, the same competencies, and then the different dimensions that I spoke of earlier on this rubric. And for example, communication would have engagement, development and evaluation of ideas, interpersonal skills, and context consideration. And then these were the 4 criteria for each. And then what does that look like in a developmental rubric? In assessing a student's assignment, maybe written like the essays that Mark shared. And this is done for each, this one is for critical thinking. And this is done for each domain of competence and definition.
So we have another comment from Joanna Spice in the chat. Thank you, Dr. Safi. It's reassuring to see other institutions follow a similar process and encounter the same challenges and questions. If you can, please share the resources you have shown us.
Of course. Thank you. I think in my conversations with various SLO champions across the coaches network, I think that it was reassuring to me as well, as we were undergoing these processes, to see that I had many similar questions and challenges as they did as well. And so I think my advice would be to, connect and collaborate and talk and share resources, share ideas, and that's about it. Okay, well,
Yeah,
thank you so much. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, no, I was going to say that one of the nice things about working with Dr. Safi on this is that, you've had just a very organized set of files and resources that you've been sharing with the faculty working on it throughout. That's, it's been very organized and extensive use of SharePoint that made it very easy to see where things are going and how the process is playing out. So I'm sure that what you have to share with this group will also be helpful and well organized.
Appreciate that. And I think I also owe credit to those SLO coaches as well that have shared many documents with me and ideas and so on. And so yes, it is a collaborative effort to take on ISLOs across the institutions that we all work for. Thank you very much. I see we are 5 o'clock. Thank you all and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.